Welcome back to Let's Make a Game, a channel about making computer role-playing games using the free program Twine and the Sugarcube format for Twine. In my previous video, I showed you a graphic that is similar to this one, and I briefly mentioned that it looks retro or old school. And I realized that I don't think I've ever explicitly talked about what makes graphics look retro or old. So I'd like to record a short video doing that. And I think the answer is, there are two answers. The first and most important one is that an old looking graphic appears to have bigger pixels than modern computers use. And secondly, I think old-looking graphics tend to have a smaller palette, and I'll explain what that means when we get to it. I'll also briefly show you how to make graphics look that way. In particular, a thing that you've got to do with GIMP, which is the free Photoshop style program that I use. So here is the Here is a graphic similar to the one that I would have shown in the last video, and it looks sort of chunky. Like if you look at this, line, you can see that the line is quite sort of thick looking and kind of, it doesn't exactly look like a straight line. It looks like it's sort of going left and right, like it's going horizontal a bit, and then it's going straight up and down, and then it's going side to side, and then it's going up and down. That's a bit easier to see if we zoom in a little bit. Oops, sorry, pressed the wrong button. If we zoom in a little bit, you can see how it's got these quite thick lines, and because it's made up of any computer picture is ultimately made up of small squares, basically. This one appears to have bigger squares than a modern computer would have. And I say appears to because if we get really close, like to the point where we can see the individual, it looks like you would think that, say, this was a single cell or a single pixel. But as you can see from the brush, it's not. I could add finer detail than what I've added, but I've deliberately chosen not to. I've deliberately chosen to make every group of 4x4 pixels, so every group of 16 pixels is the same color, as in different groups of 16 are different colors, but each individual group of 16, all of the pixels in that group are the same color. And that gives the impression that this whole group of 16 is a single pixel, and therefore that I'm either using an older computer which had bigger pixels, had a lower resolution, which is another way of saying the same thing, or that I've simulated that look at least, and you probably think that it looks kind of old school. So that is number one, and I think probably the most important determinant of an old school looking graphic. If it's got fine detail, if it uses squares that are the right size that your computer actually has, rather than grouping them, I think you're going to have difficulty making something that has that look. So how would you make a picture like this? Well, I would say the easiest way to do it is to make it small, and then when you've finished, to expand the size. And in particular, there's a technique that you need to use, or a choice that you need to make when you are expanding it. So here we have a picture that I've made. I didn't design this, I copied it off something I found off the internet, but I've made this picture. This actually is using like each pixel is one pixel. I haven't grouped these. I've just got this zoomed in very, very close. And as a result, that means that it's really tiny. If we look at this, let's say that I go View, Zoom, 100%, that's very, very small. And that might be how big I want it to be, but it's quite likely that I want it to be slightly bigger than that. So how am I going to get it bigger? Well, the first thing I could do is I could say, well, I'll just scale it. But there's a problem with that, and I'll show you what it is. So we go to Image, Scale. This is the default view that you'll get. You'll have this interpolation, and it'll say cubic. Usually you don't touch that. And because I want, let's say I want each pixel to become a group of 4 by 4 pixels, usually you do this. I could do it by calculating what 13 times 4 and 18 times 4 is, but a sort of quicker and easier way is that I choose %, and then I just choose 400%. So I want it to be 4 times bigger, and to keep that chunkiness, so I choose 400%. But as you'll see, there's a problem with this. Okay, it doesn't look chunky, it looks kind of blurry, because that's the default way that GIMP and most computer art programs deal with making a picture bigger. Let's get back to where we were, and then I'll zoom in. What they will do is something like, they will say, all right, so I've blown up this bit, so I definitely want a pixel that's black, and then I definitely want a pixel that's this flesh color. But now that I've blown this up, I've got 3 pixels in the middle. What'll I do? Well, I'll probably sort of do a fade. Like I'll do black, then I'll do black with a little bit of flesh color, then I'll do a mixture of flesh color and black, then I'll do flesh color with a bit of black, and finally I'll do black. And that's how it'll deal with the sort of the new pixels, because of course it can't find new detail, it can't make new information, so it has to do something with the data that it has. And that's not what we want. We don't want black, a slightly different color, slightly different color, slightly different color, flesh color. That's what that blurry look is. What we want is black, 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 then flesh color, flesh color, flesh color, flesh color. So what we do, it's in the interpolation option, which you usually wouldn't deal with. So we go to cubic and we choose none. All of these will give you different kinds of blurriness. The difference is just how much weight they give to different ones. What we want is none. And what that will do, and then we choose, let's say 400 again. It could be any number that's an even. We do want an even multiple of 100%. So I'll show you what happens if you don't do that. So, and then we scale it. And then we see, yes, it's kept that chunkiness. It's got, if we zoom in to the same part, we'll see that it now has black, 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 flesh color, flesh color, flesh color, flesh color. In other words, it's taken that original black pixel and everything in this area of 16 pixels, it's made it all black. So what it does there with the none option is that it's saying, okay, this pixel's black, and we've got a sort of gap of 3, a gap of 3, and then we've got a flesh colored pixel. What do we do with the ones in the middle? Well, the ones next to the black pixel will make black, and the ones next to the flesh color will make flesh color. In other words, instead of blending the 2 neighboring pixels, it just makes them exactly the same as whichever pixel is nearest to it that it knows the amount of. And that keeps that chunkiness. So you do have to do it an even multiple of 100. So 100, 200, 300, 400. Because if you don't, I'll show you what happens if you don't. So have we got back to the original size? Oops, let's just see what pixels. Yeah, that's 13 by 18 pixels. So let's say we want to make it 350% instead, and then it changes it. It changes it to something else because it can't quite get an even number of pixels that are 350% of 13, so it's just snapping it to the nearest one. But when we do that, and we still have the none option, it's sort of, I mean, it's basically right, but it's a little bit uneven. You can see that this, in fact, I'll zoom in to make it a bit easier to see. You can see that this line here is 4 wide, and this one's only 3 wide. And then you can also see that these were square before. These eyes were square, and now they're 3 by 4. And that's because, and it basically looks all right, but it sort of looks a bit off. It's not quite right. So let's go back to how it was. And the reason for that is because if you're increasing it by 100, 200, 300, 400%, each pixel in the old, in the original picture or the older picture will have exactly 4 by 4 pixels that are nearest to it, or exactly 3 by 3 or 5 by 5 or whatever it is. And so each pixel, which is a square, will become a square of new pixels of the same color. Whereas if it's 350, you'll have an uneven number of some of the pixels will have more new pixels that are near to them, particularly on the edges, it seems. And so you'll get that slight unevenness. And so that means that you should work out how big you want it roughly, and then say, okay, I want it to be 200 pixels high, or I want it to be whatever. I want it to be 100. I want it to be 100 pixels high, and I want to have 4 by 4 blocks of color. In other words, I want to pretend that the pixels are sort of 4 times as wide and 4 times as high as they really are. And so that means I have to divide that height by 4. So because I want it to be 200, I'm going to have to make a picture that is 50 pixels high. And you do this, you work it out similarly for the width. So you have to sort of work out the numbers beforehand. If you want a particular result at the end, you might just go, well, I'll do it roughly and sort of, I'll work out how much I need to increase the pixels by. But it looks better if you increase the pixels by the same amount in each bit of artwork. So once you've made a decision about that, you should probably sort of stick to it for all of the artwork. So there may be a certain amount of calculation involved beforehand. So that was the first thing. I said there were 2. The other thing that I think makes something look old school is a limited palette. And what does a limited palette mean? Well, that means that there are few colours being used. So, of course, if this was a modern, modern-looking picture, each pixel could be a different colour, and often it probably would, because we'd be using effect. We wouldn't be doing what I did here, where we paint each pixel individually. We'd be using effects and stuff to create the artwork, and we'd probably end up with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of slightly different colours. But old computers didn't have that luxury. I mean, it depends on how old you're going for, but original computers only had sort of black and white, or sometimes orange and white, or green and white. And then they added more colours, usually in multiples of 2. So originally, or at one point, you might have 4 colours. So if you limit it, I mean, if you look at this is an example. We've got this light orange here. We've got this yellow. We've got this darker colour here. Now this background colour looks like it's actually the same. This shadow colour here, I think is the same colour as this one. Or at least they're either the same or they're very, very similar. It seems like it's true. Yeah, it seems like they're the same colour. This colour that's the lines of the bricks, and this colour that's the shadows here. seems to be the same colour. And then we have a darker colour. We have a darker colour here, and then finally we have this black, which I actually added to cope with the fact that you don't have sort of infinite range of sight, that it stops after a while. So there's actually only four. It seems like there's only 4 separate colours used in this, and that is another thing that gives it a sort of old feel. And in particular, this isn't an example of what I'm about to say, but in particular, you find that if there are few colours, you often want the colours to be as different as possible. So if you've got 2 colours, you probably want them to be black and white, so there's as much contrast as possible. You probably don't want to use red and orange. This particular one did because they wanted a particular effect, but in general, you would probably want to use black and white. If you were using, say, 8 colours, you'd probably want black and white, and then you'd have blue and red, and then maybe you'd say, well, maybe we'll have a grey. You'd want to have sort of, not simple colours, because all colours are about as complex as each other, but certainly colours that are not tertiary colours, but colours that are very, the ones that we first think of. So you'd probably have, if I was doing this and trying to make it look more old school, this blue is a bit tertiary, so I would probably use, and this is probably sort of uniform accurate, but I would probably use a very pure blue. I'd go up to blue, like that sort of blue, because if you're going to have a blue, you probably want it to be as blue as possible. If you're going to have a red, you want it to be as red as possible, and so on. So if I was going to use a red, it would probably be a very pure red like that. At one point, there were 4 colours available, and you often saw these particular colours. You often had black and white, and then you had this purple, which is the red and the blue turned right up to maximum. And then you had this kind of teal colour, I guess you'd call it, which is green and blue. So the previous one is red and blue turned up to maximum and green down to 0. And then the other colour that you often saw is green and blue turned up to maximum and red down to 0. So if you were doing an alien, you might give them you might give them a teal face. You might do something like that, just because those colours are sort of very different from each other, and so you get a lot of contrast. And similarly, if you were doing flesh in this, you might make the white people literally white rather than use up one of your colours on a flesh colour. And if you did a bunch of colours, if you did a bunch of artwork and it was all using those 4 colours, I reckon that would look a lot more old school than if you had more sort of, I guess, more realistic colours like I had in my original picture. But of course, after a while, over time, we got more and more colours, and so if you're going for a sort of look like from maybe the late 90s, well, by that time, that really wasn't a factor anymore, and so you could basically have as many colours as you wanted. It just depends on how old you think of old school and retro, exactly what do you mean by retro. The other thing I would say, when I say using few colours, I mean using few colours across the whole artwork. So if you were using this little guy and you had other figures, you would probably want to make all of the flesh colour basically the same. You might have like a white flesh colour, and then you might have a sort of darker one. You might use this you might have sort of all of the black people this colour, say. And then if you use this shade of blue, if you have a blue alien, you'd probably make them that exact shade of blue. And so if you limit the colours that way, across, not just within one picture, but across lots of different pictures that you're using at once. Using the backgrounds as well, and the different sprites, as they used to call them, the pictures of the characters and stuff. Then that will look, all else being equal, that will look a lot more old school. Having said that, I think the chunkiness is more important than color use. The color use is a bit more subtle, but it will help. If you limit your color palette, it will help, and if you choose colors that are highly contrasting, that will help as well. But I think the chunkiness is the main thing, and just remember, if you're using GIMP, no interpolation, none. Otherwise, when you're scaling up, you'll get that blurry look. So I hope that was useful or interesting to at least some of you, and I hope you will tune in next time.